Good day. Hello. Good day. Hello. Greetings. This is Terry Rankin and Michael Dowd, Reverend Michael Dowd. Familiar, his face is probably more familiar to most of you than mine is, but that'll keep it interesting. Um, Michael and I met through a mutual friend, Dean Spillane Walker, whom we both know. At least I knew him first through Deep Adaptation. I don't know where your relationship began with him, Michael, but you're nodding, so I assume yes. And Dean through deep adaptation asked me if he could interview me for his poetry of predicament series, specifically around the parenting dimension of it. And after he recorded that and I watched it, he we corresponded and we've become fast friends. He told me, he said, you remind me of Michael Dowd. And I thought, well, who's Michael Dowd, right? And so because I knew nothing of you until that point. And so this has been, geez, almost 2 years ago, because of December when anyway. So that's how I came to know of you, Michael, was through Dean. And that I said, well, is that an insult or a compliment? I better find out who this guy is. So I started looking into your stuff. And as I think I mentioned in our prelude here, I'm just astonished at the depth and the incisive and trenchant grasp of all the dimensions of the predicament that we face in the 21st century. I love the metaphors you use, the prodigal return in a couple of your videos. I love the breadth of your the connection to the literature. You've got to be one of the best archivists that's collecting the relevant and compelling information about this, both scientifically and spiritually. Not that those are opposites, but resonant harmony. So let me just say welcome and thank you so much for setting aside some time to have a conversation with me. So jump right in. What would you like to talk about?
Well, thanks, Terry. I mean, I've interacted with you and seen some of what you posted on the Deep Adaptation Facebook group. It was called Positive Deep Adaptation. I think it's now just Deep Adaptation, but I've just respected just damn near everything I've seen that you've written. I thought, yeah, I agree with that. And you've commented quite favorably on a number of the things that I've posted. And so I really was looking forward to this. And then just in our little pre-conversation before you started recording, to see the overlap in terms of passion and interest in bringing together, science, religion, spirituality, inspiration, philosophy of language, philosophy of science, which were, as I mentioned to you, my two favorite courses in all of my graduate and undergraduate work were philosophy of language and philosophy of science. And now in the last 8 years, sort of my immersion in the rise and fall of civilizations, the ecological predicament that we face, abrupt climate change, the possibility of near-term human extinction, and all that. So yeah, I already, just even this is the first time that we've spoken live in this format, but I already can say that I consider you a close colleague, somebody who I want as a thinking partner in sort of stuff that I'll be unfolding and working on throughout the summer of 2021, but beyond that. So yeah, this is a treat to have this conversation. Thank you.
I second that motion, and it's an honor and a privilege to come into that kind of dialogue with you as what you call a thinking partner. So, where to begin? I'm just for the benefit of those watching in another screen. That's what I'm looking up at. I have 4 of Michael's videos in tabs in my browser. The most recent one, I think, Michael, is Serenity Prayer for the 21st Century.
Yeah, I just uploaded that 2 days ago.
It's wonderful, and it's less than 26 minutes long. It's only 25 and some seconds long, and it does a fantastic job of weaving together so many of the threads that you cover. We've agreed that the Russian doll, Matryoshka doll, is a good metaphor for so many things. Both of us kind of see things through that lens. And that appears in this video, if I recall correctly. But you bring together all of those layers in this short, very dense. I mean, it's a very dense video. You better have your thinking cap on when you sit down to watch this one. But
yeah, I encourage people to watch rather than merely listen. and to do so without multitasking, because it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
visual. It's you know, I have gorgeous slides. Every one of my slides is from somewhere around North America, as Connie and I have been traveling North America the last 19 years. But also, it's, yeah, as you say, it's packed, it's dense. It's 25 minutes long, but in a way, I've spent between 20 and 40, sometimes 50 hours a week over the last 8 years studying the rise and fall of civilizations, climate change, abrupt climate change, ecology and ecological paradigm, the difference between true, genuine sustainability and faux or delusional, quote unquote, sustainability. And in a way, this now, I've got to say, I really, I'm sort of elated, because I feel that this 25-minute video is the best short introduction to this whole body of work. I mean, I've got lots, as you know, I've got lots of longer hour and 20-minute videos. But this is sort of my first introduction. If somebody's, you know, if I have 25 minutes with somebody and this is the only thing they ever experience of mine, it would be this video. This
Well, they get the whole story.
Serenity Prayer.
Yeah, they get the whole story.
Yeah.
And it especially attracted me because I'm sure you'll agree, the Serenity Prayer itself is from the Stoic philosophy tradition. And the Stoics were very formative in my early years in philosophical thinking, especially Chrysippus, who's one of the least known philosophers out of there. Well, he's the best known of the Stoics other than Marcus Aurelius and probably Epictetus, but he was the logician, which is why I was attracted to him.
Sure.
And you talk about historical trends, there are, I think you would agree, there are singularities in history trajectories where, you know, we go off on this trajectory and this one was the road not taken. And then we cross another singularity or tipping point and we go in another historical cosmic trajectory.
Right.
And there was a road not taken. Chrysippus was a road not taken.
Interesting. Very
Because
interesting.
there was a, in my, we know very little about Chrysippus. The two, and everything's from secondary reference, and they're only scraps. But the two things that are kind of dominant in those scraps are the way he died, which is wonderful, and the logic that the Stoics had that Chrysippus wrote, as opposed to the Aristotelian categorical logic. Well, Aristotle won, Chrysippus lost, which I think in that debate, if you will. And the point of contention was conditionality, the if-then statement. Chrysippus had this enormously complicated analysis of if-then conditionality. Material conditionality, as we know it in all modern mathematics since Russell and Whitehead, is Aristotelian. And Aristotelian logic lasted for 2,500 years until the late 19th century. And Russell and Whitehead, when they did Principia Mathematica in the early 20th, they uncovered the paradoxes of material conditionality. And it wasn't until possible world semantics, and I know I'm getting very academic here, and I apologize to our listeners especially, but I'm known in my family sometimes as the sermonator.
Sermonator, I took you.
Kind of a name I gave myself, to be honest, but be that anyway, that contention led to 2,000 years before the paradoxes of that material categorical view of things were exposed by Russell and Whitehead, 1912, 1914. And it took the rest of that century into the late 1900s for possible world semantics to solve those decisively. The bad news is, around the same time, speaking of philosophy of language, Wittgenstein's Logico Tractatus Philosophicus, right, or Tractatus Logico Philosophicus was written, and the Vienna Circle picked it up and used it as the logic for their logical empiricism and their logical positivism, and essentially drove a stake through the heart of metaphysics with it. And science at that point became, and this is a topic I'd like for us to explore, which is why I'm having this long introduction. drove a stake literally through the heart of metaphysics. So the babies that got thrown out with that bathwater, of course, were ethics, aesthetics, theology, etc. And we entered into a period of what I regard as, well, is commonly referred to as value-free science. Okay, you have to dispel any value judgment in order to do real rational science. Which, by the way, I've asked. I helped start the Scientists for Extinction Rebellion group in the UK. I was one of the founding members,
Mhm.
and I ask scientists regularly. I say, so science is the epitome, the apex, the pinnacle, the zenith of rational human capability, right? And invariably the answer is absolutely, certainly, sure. That's what science is all about, is the rational view of truth and reality. Well, how did we get here? If that's the best rationality we've got, how did we end up going extinct?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm yet to get a good answer to that question from a scientist. But anyway,
Well, I'm
that
not a scientist, but I've got some thoughts on that matter.
well, good, because that's where I want this to kind of go. Because it looks to me like when the Vienna Circle between the two world wars in the early 20th century moved out of Europe, they went mainly to the UK and the US, Carnap and others. And they went mainly into posh positions in universities at the top of the academic culture in the US and the UK. And in my mind, what happened was positivism in the US went to bed with American utilitarian pragmatism, which was a corruption of Peirce, by the way. And what happened there was capitalism or just materialism took over science, and science and technology became the indentured servants to that worldview, that materialistic
I would
value.
agree. I'd agree with that analysis. Yeah.
And here we are as a
Yeah.
result. There's no really rational science. And what we have is a self annihilating world. Well, life on Earth with us as the apex predators, we're killing ourselves and everything else. So, having regurgitated all of that onto your plate, give me your thoughts on this.
Well, are you familiar with Ian McGilchrist's?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
because it's that divorce of the two hemispheres, or not the divorce, but the ascendancy of rationality, devoid of ethics, devoid of morality, devoid of values, devoid of context, devoid of relationship. I mean, I see science at its best is helping us to understand reality. Myth or religion, the fundamental role of myth or religion is to, when it's doing its job, is to ensure right relationship to reality. Understanding reality without having a healthy, mutually enhancing relationship to reality simply guarantees your extinction. It guarantees ecocide. And I've been influenced very deeply by sort of my main male mentors are, and I say male because I've got several major female mentors, but my main male mentors are Thomas Berry, William R. Catton Jr., who wrote the most important book I've ever read in my life, and as I always say, um, Overshoot, the ecological basis of revolutionary change. But Teddy Goldsmith, Edward Goldsmith, who was the founder and the editor of the Ecologist magazine for close to 40 years before he died, he wrote one of the top, most popular environmental books of all time, Blueprint for Survival, in 1972 or 78, I forget, somewhere in the 70s. But the two books that I find most compelling and most helpful, practically, is his book, The Stable Society, written in like 78, and then his magnum opus, The Way, An Ecological Worldview, which both of those attempt to take 500 years of anthropological research in terms of our best understanding of the difference between genuinely stable, sustainable cultures that preserve the biosphere, that basically the biosphere is treated as a greater thou, not a lesser it, and the well-being and wealth and progress and well-being and success are all measured in ecocentric terms. How well the soil and the forest and the life and the climate, basically all the aspects of reality that we depend upon fully to survive and thrive, how well those are doing. So they're ecocentric or life-centered measures of well-being and wealth, rather than anthropocentric or human-centered well-being and wealth. And so his book, The Stable Society, and then, which he interestingly enough, he defines, his definition of religion is the control mechanism of stable, sustainable cultures, meaning it's that aspect of society that speaks with moral authority that the future will not be compromised by the present, that we will be faithful to the future or accountable to the future. That's that whole seventh generation thing. But also it's faithful to the past. So you're faithful to the ancestors, faithful to the descendants, the seventh generation, and faithful to what we would call Gaia, or the body of life upon which we depend. And so that's the functional role of religion in healthy cultures. However, the axial age, the last 2,500 years, the great religious traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, all the great major faiths of humanity of our time, emerged in the last 2,600 years. And by that time, there were already, these religions emerged in cultures that were already profoundly unstable, unsustainable. They were already into the boom and bust, progress, regress, growth, and decline pattern that's the standard in unsustainable cultures, in exploitative cultures, human-centered, anthropocentric cultures. And so religion really downgrades. It's no longer the control mechanism, because it can't. Religion can't in any meaningful way limit the political and economic spheres from decimating the soil, water, forest, life upon which they depend. And so religion sort of downgrades to not the control mechanism, but a coping mechanism. It helps people have good lives and healthy relationships and die peacefully and have a pretty good legacy in the midst of a dysfunctional, exploitative culture or civilization. And so I've found that Thomas Berry, the whole universe story, that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself and that sort of thing. Teddy Goldsmith, in terms of his understanding of the difference between sustainable and unsustainable cultures, and William Catton, in his profound understanding, it's sort of a whole paradigm shift of, ecology as the foundational. I mean, I consider ecology my theology. I mean, ecology is the heart of my theology. And so those are my most significant male mentors. And in terms of female mentors, I would say Joanna Macy and Dolores LaChapelle. Dolores LaChapelle was a deep ecologist. She wrote her most significant work is Sacred Land, Sacred Sex, Rapture of the Deep, concerning deep ecology and celebrating life. And she was an independent scholar. And that book is profound. It's an entire worldview. It's probably the best book on deep ecology in existence. And I trained with her for a year, my wife and I, and some others, David Abram and Max Olschlager and other people in the deep ecology world. And then Lynn Margulis was a significant mentor. I studied with her in Massachusetts back she co-founder of the Gaia hypothesis, Gaia theory. So all that is simply to say that to my mind, religion is to help us relate to reality, and science is to help us understand reality. But science without a commitment to the future first, simply about manipulating matter, manipulating energy, and doing so in a human-centered form, is bringing about our extinction, is actually causing us to overheat the planet, and quite likely certainly leading to the extinction of Homo colossus, that's William Catton term, industrial humanity, and quite possibly leading to the extinction of Homo sapiens. We just don't know. You're on mute.
I know. It takes me a minute to get back and turn it off. I was typing a little bit because I was making notes that I
Sure.
back to. I find among those of us who are about as far away from denial as we can humanly get, because you do make a good point in a couple of your shows that I've watched, that no matter how awake and aware we are, we wake up every day and we don't really live in that awareness fully. We're
constantly, right. And in a way we can't. I mean, one can't look at the collapse of one's own civilization, the potential or possible extinction of one's species, one can't stay in a gaze with that. I mean, there's a thing, denial gets a bad rap, unfortunately. I think there's many forms of denial are, or at least some forms of denial are really adaptive in intention. It's, we're not in denial exactly. We understand, we even accept certain facts, but it's like we have to wake up each day and, parent or grandparent or, work or whatever. And so we just don't pay attention to it. And I think that's a healthy coping mechanism.
Thank you for bringing that back into focus. That was the phrase I was thinking of without knowing the words. Yeah, adaptive inattention. That's accurate. It seems that those of us who live with adaptive inattention and yet pretty coherent, holistic, integrated awareness from both the religious or spiritual or divine and the scientific and the empirical and the existential, those of us who live in that space, even when we can't pay attention to it, it's funny how we all seem to be converging, I think, and this is more intuitive than analytic. Speaking of McGilchrist, this is more right brain than left brain.
Right.
Exactly. All seem to be converging on the same truths. We all seem to be drawing ourselves almost gravitationally into the same reality. And I find that fascinating. And I'll give you an example of one that it's almost like discovering the same pearl of great price, to use a mythical reference, that has already been pre-discovered by hundreds before us in our ancestral tradition and by peers and colleagues. But anyway, my example is, I'll give you the phrase first and then I'll unpack it a little. And there is an article, there's an essay on the Deep Adaptation Forum, the Ning platform.
Right.
The title of it is, you could Google cognitive freefall.
Cognitive freefall, okay.
Yeah. And in it, I introduce a concept that I call permaculture sovereignty.
Okay.
And by that, I take permaculture to mean the whole universal state of nature.
Okay.
Nature everywhere, always, in all ways, from one end to the other, from Big Bang to Big Crunch, everywhere, always, state of nature. Okay. And the point I make is that permaculture is governed by causality, causation, what in common parlance is referred to as causal law, that gnomic nature of the cosmos, from the superstring vibrating energy at the bottom to colliding neutron stars at the top, right? All the way through and through, top to bottom, causality is what brings us into being and takes us out of being. Well, brings our being into presence and takes our presence back into just being. Okay, that's kind of how I would phrase that. So that's the permaculture side of it. Causality is the sovereignty of it. And you've made this point of thinking, I'm not sure which one, but one of the 4 videos I've been watching about how nature, oh, it was the Julia Roberts segment, right? She was speaking to nature, right?
Right.
It was,
yeah. Well, she wasn't. She was nature speaking. So she was a personification. Right. Julia Roberts, nature is speaking videos that were a collaboration between Hollywood stars and Conservation International. And there's about, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, I forget how many, but these little 1 or 2 minute videos where some Hollywood star personifies some aspect of nature. And she speaks as Mother Nature. So she's not speaking about Mother Nature. She's Mother Nature speaking. Right.
Exactly. And she makes the point that we'd love to ignore. And in fact, the truth historically that humanity has ignored it is that Mother Nature doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I want to lean into that with you, but the way all of those nature speaking videos end is humans need nature. Humans need nature. Nature doesn't need humans.
Exactly.
But I want to lean into it because this is the first time I had the opportunity to actually have a conversation with somebody who's philosophically literate on this topic. The indigenous perspective, I think, is far more helpful. And I say helpful because I think this is practical truth, not factual truth. David Sloan Wilson has a profound and important distinction between practical and factual realism, or practical and factual truth. That practical truth is if you act as if this belief is true, you experience personal wholeness, social coherence, and ecological integrity. That's what the role of religion is designed to do, is to help us to live in right relationship to reality, our individual reality, our social reality, and ultimately primary reality, the living world. And science is to help us understand reality, but if it doesn't also attend to right relationship to reality, as we discussed earlier, it can be ecocidal, and has been in our time. So to speak that the universe doesn't care about us is one way, it's accurate, but it's human-centered. It would be just as accurate and far more useful. I suggest that actually this may be the difference between an ecocidal and a truly sustainable worldview, is to say that the universe loves universally. That is, the universe loves all creatures the same. And I'm using love obviously metaphorically, but to say the universe doesn't give a fuck about humans, or to say the universe loves all species equally, and all is, you get the same point philosophically, which is that we're not central to things. But as Einstein, I think, posed the question, or at least it was attributed to him, the fundamental question is the universe friendly or not? Is the universe, for us or not? And I think the fundamental stance of genuinely sustainable cultures is a I-thou respectful relationship to what I call primary reality, which would include the ecosphere and the cosmos. And so to have a right relationship to reality, because we have primate, mammalian, hominin brains, the only way we understand relationship is through relational categories in terms of our brain. And so I find it far more useful, practically true, to imagine that the universe loves unconditionally but universally, and that humans aren't singled out. And so we're not uniquely special. We're special just in the way that dragonflies and algae. I remember somebody saying, God loves his plagues too, So it's a fairly minor philosophical point, but I think it may be major in terms of our stance toward the ecosphere, our stance toward the cosmos.
Yeah, I absolutely stand corrected. I did not mean, when I said doesn't give a shit, I didn't mean indifference or apathy. I meant we're dispensable if we
Well,
force.
yes, and given how pervasive humanism, that we are the be all and end all, that we are what the universe was intending, that we are what it's all about, that we're such, given all that, yeah, the idea that the universe is indifferent is, I think, a very healthy corrective to that. But I think the indigenous or pro-future or and let's just go with indigenous perception that reality needs to be related to in a healthy way, and we do that through personal metaphors. I find it far more useful to imagine that the universe is benevolent, but universally so. So we're not singled out in any way, shape, or form.
I totally agree with you, and it's let me kind of couch it in the terms that brought me to the same conclusion. I professionally for years, and even today, I still, even for Extinction Rebellion today, on this Walk with Nick activity they're doing, I'm a project manager and a program manager. That's what I did in IT and AI for income for, 30 years, 30 plus. But anyway, there's the notion, and Daniel Pauly brought this notion into ecology, the baseline shift.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And in my dissertation that I mentioned, I expand on that to be a cosmic or universal concept. Nature has a baseline determined by those causal laws. The beauty of it is unfathomable to the mere human mind, but the beauty that we do fathom is that it includes us.
Yes.
And it does that because I dare say we are precious to nature. But if we become fools and think that baseline is there for us to shift, we're in serious trouble.
Yeah, and we have done that, and we're now into, at least in my worldview, we're into runaway mode. We're into unstoppability. That whether there are any humans alive whatsoever 100 years from now, or maybe even 50 years from now, or whether there are pockets, 7,000 or 70,000 pockets of, 100 to 200 humans, or, some healthy small scale civilizations living in outposts that are still habitable. I don't think we can know that for sure, but it seems to me that there are certain things that are already out of our control, meaning that if everybody woke up tonight enlightened and committed to living as ecologically oriented as possible, or if everybody died tonight and there was no humans tomorrow, there are certain things that are already in process and unstoppable and inevitable that are leading to, a 3 or 4 or higher degrees Celsius world in terms of average. And I think it's quite likely, I would put it at probably a 75% chance. I'm just pulling this number out of my ass. But I think there's probably a 75% chance that 100 years from now, there will be no mammals larger than something that, that can hide in the ground. It'll be a world more conducive to reptiles, as much of evolutionary history has been, a much hotter world. Reptiles can still potentially thrive, but I think we mammals are probably done for, most mammals, because of things that are already in process. I think that we will see every year from now on, we're speaking in June of 2021. I think every year we're going to see greater wildfires, more of the world's forests burning in Siberia, the boreal forest, California, Oregon, Washington, Australia, like we saw last year. I think that's already in runaway mode. I think the acidification of the oceans is already in runaway mode, and there will be no corals soon. Coral reefs will be gone, and all the life that supports. I think the ice in the Arctic will continue to shrink in volume and just sea ice extent, and the glaciers of the world. I think we're already in a contracting. Dar Jamel's book, The End of Ice. Peter Wadham's book, A World Without Ice, I think is what it was called. These are, and ice plays such a fundamental role in like being the refrigerator of Earth. That once the ice is gone from the Arctic, even for a month or even for a few weeks, all of that heat that was being reflected now is being absorbed by the shallow blue ocean, which then releases more methane, which, more ice. And so the jet stream, which for the Holocene, for last 10,000 years, which made civilization possible, the stability of the Holocene, like a 1 degree Celsius plus or minus, that stability, which allowed for the growing of grain at scale and allowed for, with fossil fuels, billions of people, that's going bye-bye. It's already gone bye-bye. And so we will see a multi-breadbasket failure where 2 or more of the 5 major grain growing regions of the world fail in the same year. That could happen this year, might not happen until next year or 5 years or 10 years from now, but that it's going to happen in the next decade is pretty damn certain. I'd put it at over 80%. And if 3 or more of the 5 grain growing regions fail because of the wagged out jet stream and all that, you're looking at 3 or 4 billion, or at least 2 or 3 billion people starving in a year or 14 months.
Yeah.
So how to be with all of that, how to like just not be a doomer and get cynical, but how to basically be with the potential, the very real possibility, well, the inevitability of the extinction of Homo colossus, industrial humanity, but the possible extinction of Homo sapiens, and how to be with that, how to do the grief work, and then ultimately come through and then live life fully and love the life you live and be a blessing to your community and a contribution to your friends and neighbors, and keep a relatively peaceful heart in the midst of contraction, because that's the fact. That's where we are. And I think that's pretty much what my life is about now, as you know, is promoting what I call a post-doom. You can't get to post-doom without going through doom, unfortunately, but promoting a post-doom mind, a post-doom heart, and post-doom living, which the truth of the matter is, even though we can't transform everything and we might even go extinct, there's tremendous great work we can do, such as moving trees and helping other species survive this bottleneck, which we can do. And in fact, if we don't do that consciously, hundreds of species of trees will unnecessarily go extinct that we could potentially save. Capping the nukes and preventing, as you know, preventing nuclear meltdowns. I mean, we've got 440 nuclear power plants in the world. Yeah. Whether 5 of those melt down in the next, say, 50 to 100 years, or 125 of those melt down, that's a huge difference. And so what we do in the next decade could make a difference in terms of preventing the most catastrophic toxicity. So at any rate, I'm sort of on my soapbox. I apologize.
But the conversation where you were on your soapbox, I definitely did. So I appreciate it. 2 things. Just kind of where your right brain meets your left brain in that McGilchrist model. And I want to come back to that in a minute. But anyway, kind of where those two are in resonant harmony, which gives you being of one mind, right? What do you sense from the marrow of your bones is the probability that the actions you describe are really going to make a difference in the survival of humanity, Homo sapiens?
I think that with regards to plants, shrubs, and trees, native trees, I think that there will be enough people, enough individuals, because these are actions that individuals can take. Hang on, let me grab this. This book, get my earbuds back in. This book, The Journeys of Trees by Zach St. George, a story about forests, people, in the future. This was published last year by a top publisher, W.W. Norton. And Zach St. George is an award-winning journalist. And it features my wife, Connie. She's the main character of the book. It features her from the very first sentence throughout the book. And it's what individuals can do to save species of plants and trees by assisting them in migrating. And so I actually believe that a lot of people will take whatever plant or tree or shrub that they're particularly passionate about, that they love, and take seeds from further south that are warm adapted and move them north, sometimes hundreds of miles, maybe more, but in a way that no other animal can move their seeds. So I think there's a high likelihood, I'd put it well over 70%, that there will be people who are, my wife's organization is Torreya Guardians. It started by taking this Torreya, this Florida Torreya tree that got stuck in northern Florida at the end of the last glacier and wasn't able to migrate back to the southern Appalachians where it really wants to be at this time in interglacial. And so she's assisting this tree in migrating. And now she's also taken on and created videos, these video blogs with other trees, the redwood and Joshua tree and just all kinds of stuff. So I do think that people will do that. Do I honestly believe that our species will be responsible enough to ensure as few nuclear meltdowns and as little geological scale evil toxicity as possible with regards to our chemical wastes? I probably would put it at maybe 10% that we will do the right thing. I put it at probably 90% that we won't do the right thing, that we will have some form of techno-optimism and delusional understanding of that industrial civilization has eternal life, it's everlasting, we don't need to attend to that kind of stuff. And so consequently, we won't take the preventative measures that we would need to take. And I suspect over the next 30, 40 years, if we survive that long, there will be power outages, terror, terrorist kinds of things, just human error, that we will probably have many Fukushima-like accidents, Chernobyl-like accidents. And yeah, I'm not optimistic that we will do the right thing.
You're more optimistic than I am, to be honest with you. And I'll try to bring 2 things into the conversation that will help you understand why I'm not as optimistic. Okay. And I won't try to put a label on it. I'll just discuss these 2 points. One, from the indigenous language perspective, the most valuable concept I've come across, and I'm a monolingual. Well, that's not true. I speak English as my native tongue, but I can speak Fortran and COBOL and all these computer languages. But other than that, those are the languages I know. But for the indigenous First Nations, Turtle Island languages, there's a common theme that's pronounced several ways. The one most familiar to us today is Watiko.
Yes, exactly. I just finished reading Jack Forbes's book on Wetiko, however you pronounce it. But yeah, Columbus and Other Cannibals. And it was one of the most sobering, upsetting, inevitable. I mean, it was a profound book. I would put it in my top 20 most profound books I've ever read in my life.
What grabbed me about it, and the more I've thought about it, and I've been thinking about this going on several months, is that madness, that insane, cannibalistic, annihilative energy is evil.
It is. And I'd actually say that's what the mythic fall of Adam and Eve, to my mind, is the shift from life-centeredness, eco-theocentrism, to human-centeredness. And once we do that, and then we start mining metals, we get on this, I don't know if you're familiar with Andy Schmuckler's The Parable of the Tribes. But once we get into that, we get into an arms race where for the last 7,000 years, it kind of was inevitable that we would get to where we are now. And Wetiko is at the heart of all that, in my
opinion. And it's I'm having a hard time finding an argument that says that isn't what's ruling the world today.
It is what's ruling the world.
There's no question. It is. Okay. Now,
well, ruling the world, meaning it's the dominant force. There are still pro-future cultures on the edges, but they're always, or almost always, dominated by and overpowered by this anthropocentric Wetiko perspective. Yeah.
So, having come through that, and trying to figure, and I'm looking. This kind of came out of the dissertation, but I'm looking at truth and reality as best I can discover the truth and see the reality from which it came. Okay. And I'm asking myself, and this is kind of an Occam's razor exercise. Okay. How do I find the simplest, best explanation for that truth and reality if I look at history? And I want to go back to the early 70s and do a thought experiment with you.
Okay.
70, 71, before Limits to Growth came out. Okay. Before it came out, if you were a member of the Club of Rome, especially if you were in the inner circle, which I'm sure they had one, at the Club of Rome, you're sitting at the table with a council of Wetiko.
That's a very interesting concept. I think you're probably right. Although these were also the people that had, many of them, some of the most well-honed systemic or ecological, not ecological in terms of indigenous understandings or relationally ecological, but certainly in terms of conceptual sort of left brain rational understandings of ecology and
oh systems. Yeah, I would not doubt or question their factual grasp of the truth and reality of their times. But I think their factual grasp was around one purpose. And I think the best description of that purpose is what Adam Smith called the vile maxim, all for me, none for you, and what Noam Chomsky calls the vicious cycle of power and wealth. When you put those two together, you've got Wetiko madness.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Wow. Naked. So put yourself sitting at that table as one of those people, okay? And you're reading the early drafts of the Limits to Growth as it's in a working manuscript process. And those authors are bringing you those materials and you're reading them and you're saying what can be left in, what has to be taken out, how it has to be phrased, et cetera, et cetera. You're customizing that story to keep it true, but at the same time to not drive people like lemmings over the edge of a cliff, right? However, now you have a dilemma as a seat at that table with that power and that wealth and that rule and control over truth and reality for the whole planet, as far as people understand them. And you've got a dilemma. What do? We either take the story we've been telling, which is the greatest good for the greatest number. That was the morality of utilitarian pragmatism at the time. Or we go by the Weil maxim and the power and wealth cycle and say, get the hell out of Dodge. Right? Now, having conducted that thought experiment and looking at where we are today and following the money, which I think is usually a very good principle, what's it going into? Automation, robots that aren't subject or vulnerable to environmental transitions or changes. And we're looking at space exploration being driven by at least two, if not three, of the top 5 billionaires on the planet, all of whom are American. Musk, Bezos, probably Gates as well. And I'm going, I think they chose to go the Weil maximum power and wealth route. And they're getting the hell out of Dodge and leaving us here to die.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work. It's a delusion. I mean, one of the little, there's a little short video. I think it's 20 minutes long or so. It's actually, it was originally posted up on YouTube as, I don't know, 7 or 8 little short 2 or 3 minute videos. But now on Vimeo, it's just one, like 23-minute video called Maz Alone, M-A-Z-Z, Maz Alone. And I encourage anybody who's watching or listening to this conversation, to, after you're done here, Google Maz Alone, watch that, and you will get in spades why the idea that billionaires can isolate themselves and,
wait, I didn't say they could.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, they want to.
Looks like that's what they're trying to do.
Right, of course, right.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's a complete delusion. And, once we have a blue ocean event and once we have things wig out in a very serious way and we lose habitat for complex mammals, it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or whatever, you're not going to live on Mars and you're not going to live in New Zealand. You're going to be dead like the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, to me, that's a poster child case of Watiko madness.
Right, of course, yeah, and I think it's probably, I think it's unstoppable. I just don't see that worldview, that profound human-centered, arrogant domination worldview, ending or stopping, other than from the consequences of its own evil, its own sickness.
That brings me to the second of the 2 points. There was a thought experiment.
Okay.
And the second is what I think we've kind of found ways to navigate the denialism in all of its forms, including the inattention that you mentioned.
Adaptive inattention. Right?
Yeah, adaptive inattention. We found ways that wherever we are in the autistic spectrum of being aware of the problem, because it will make you autistic when you become aware of it, right? We found ways to at least begin to cope. But that, in its many shades and forms, that denialism seems to be giving way to a sense of just suffusive futility. And I understand that, and I can relate to it, and I struggle against it. The book I'm writing, and I've only written one book, my dissertation, and the one I'm working on now, which just never seems to have an ending, is titled Rage of Grief. And there's this just haunting sense of futility that I struggle against. And I wrote a little essay on it recently. There's a work by a man named Zygmunt Bauman. Does that name ring a bell with you?
Well,
he wrote, the first in the series was Liquid Modernity, where he posits the concept that post-modernity is kind of a helpful idea to get you out of thinking about Enlightenment modernity. It's helpful in that sense, but it doesn't describe truth and reality. Postmodernity still is built around a teleological. What we're doing has a reason and a cause that drives it toward an end. There is an end toward which change is driving. Liquid modernity, according to Bauman, is change is the end in itself. Okay, it's a profound insight. And then he wrote Liquid Love, Liquid Society. So he takes the concept and expands it across a whole philosophical view. And the one that I've most enjoyed recently was Liquid Time.
Okay.
Liquid Times, Liquid Time. And I wrote a little 2-page blog post about it. And it's about this problem of futility. And I think you can relate to what I made of it. First, I talk about how the futility is inescapable unless you bring your being and presence down to the shortest instance of time and pour all of your love, all of your being into that presence in that tiniest instant of time. Fortunately, there's a scientific term for the tiniest instant of time, and I love the word. It's called a zeptojiffy.
Okay.
I'm deadly serious. Look it up. It's hilarious. On the time scale, theoretically, that physicists use, at the lowest end, it's something like 3.5 times 10 to the minus 46 seconds. It's the time it takes a photon to travel one wavelength of light.
Okay.
So, just metaphorically, though, if you don't think about the next zeptojiffy or the past zeptojiffy, but you just think about the present zeptojiffy, and you find yourself constantly pouring all the love you can or everything into that zeptojiffy from one to the next, futility is dissipated, dissolved, eliminated
Okay.
by love. So
Yes.
the conclusion was hate isn't the opposite of love. Apathy isn't the opposite of love. Futility is the opposite of love.
Okay.
And it's that pouring out unconditionally, agape, as best you can summon it, into every slice of time for the rest of your life
Yeah, I like it.
that restores meaning, purpose, and opens up truth and puts you back into reality in relationship with it.
Okay.
That's kind of, I wrote a little blog post about this.
Okay.
I'm pouring this all out for you, and I'm giving you all this because I'm interested in how you receive it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it intuitively makes sense. I mean, where I find my joy, where I find a sense of purpose and meaning, and is in recognizing that I am not separate from the universe. I am part of the universe. I'm a part of the body of life. I'm expression of life. I'm organically related to the universe and to the biosphere and to life. So my identity, my sense of self, is larger than my skin-encapsulated ego, in Alan Watts's terms. Also, to recognize the essential nature of mortality, that death is not a mistake. Humans aren't responsible for the existence of death in the universe. It's an inherent part of nature. The opposite of life isn't death. The opposite of life is space. And so I see death as sacred, as holy, no less sacred than life. And so recognizing that allows me to recognize that we have set into motion, and we are part of systems that are so self-destructive and so ecocidal that they could very well end our species. And certainly we are in the decline of industrial civilization. And so to the degree that I can be at peace with just the nature of reality, and then find ways to be of support, to be a blessing, to be a contribution to my family, my friends, my neighbors, and to do this work, this post-doom work that I do in terms of my presentations, my videos, and my sort of, 2 or 3 Sundays a month, I do Zoom sermons or homilies for various, mostly Unitarian Universalist or liberal Christian churches, sometimes secular environmental groups, climate groups. This video that you mentioned that you just watched, that I just uploaded a couple days ago, called the Serenity Prayer for the 21st Century, pro-future love and action. I could say post-doom love and action. And that was catalyzed because I was invited to deliver the keynote, like the lead presentation in a 3-day conference called Living Brightly. And it was mostly young women that were involved in this. And I asked the organizer, Kat Haber, who was a dear friend and colleague, I said, "Are you sure you want me to deliver the kickoff presentation of a conference called Living Brightly?" But she wanted to be able to, she wanted somebody who could paint the big picture, including the scary stuff, the scariest of the scary stuff that we could go extinct, but ultimately who came from a place of love and joy and that kind of stuff. So anyway, so that's where that emerged. I created a 15-minute video that I delivered on Thursday for that. And then I created this 25-minute video, which is a slightly more expanded version that's now up on YouTube. So I think living in the present moment, whatever that word was that you used, you know, I like thinking about the past. I filter through what can I be grateful for. And in terms of looking at the future, I filter through how can I more deeply trust reality, trust time, trust the flow of the universe. And being at peace with my mortality, knowing that I'm going to die soon, and knowing that I'm not separate from the universe, that I'm part of this body of life, the combination of the cluster of those things allows me to live a pretty damn joyous life. I mean, I love my life, and it's pretty simple. And Connie and I live here in Ypsilanti, Michigan. We live 2 blocks from our granddaughter. I get to care for, you know, several times a week. We take walks almost every day. And so we're getting to know our neighbors. Our life is simple. And I also know that we could die in the next year or 2 or 3 or next decade or more. And I'm not freaked by that. I trust that. I trust that process. And so that allows me to be fully engaged with no despair, no sense of futility whatsoever. There's the sense of contribution. And oh my God, I get to be alive and conscious and engaged in this world. How fucking amazing is that? Which isn't to say I don't sometimes feel grief and sadness and depression, but I don't wallow in them and I don't stay there very long, because I'm profoundly aware that my identity is as large as the universe and as deep as time, deep time, and that death is an integral part of life, and that my worldview is quite ecocentric rather than anthropocentric, and that helps.
I made a note while you were talking. Life and death are born together, the twin siblings of reality and truth.
Yes, exactly. And I got the line that life, that death, that the opposite of life isn't death. The opposite of life is space. I got that from John Michael Greer.
Well, of course, this thought, as you were speaking, what started resonating just resoundingly in my own thinking was Jenkinson.
Yeah, Stephen Jenkinson, right?
And Derek Jensen.
Yes.
I mean, you put those 2 guys together, and that's the kind of truth they're telling.
Exactly.
Especially like his latest book, The Bright Green Lies.
Right, Bright Green Lies. Yeah, I mean, the 2 best books that I know of, the 2 best resources that I know of that just destroy the illusion of techno-optimism, techno-utopianism are Bright Green Lies by Derek Jensen, Lierre Keith, and Max Wilberg. And also the documentary created, I forget the woman's name that created on that title, Bright Green Lies. And then Alice Friedman's new book, I think it's Life Beyond Fossil Fuels or something like that. And it's a more academic approach, but it's devastating in terms of alternative energy and so-called green energy and, you know, so-called clean green stuff.
Yeah. Well, Michael Moore tried to send that message and got just vilified for it.
Yeah, no, exactly. But all of the critiquers of that movie, of the, you know, Jeff Gibbs and Michael Moore's, you know, Planet of the Humans, those who attacked that movie missed the fundamental message, which is we are in ecological overshoot. That's a fact. That's not a belief. And no market-based economy, no technological solution, whether it's green tech or green capitalism or anything else, will do anything other than exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's almost a cliche that any sufficiently advanced technology will appear as magic.
Right. Right.
Well, we live in an age where how much do you know? How much can you really explain about one of these?
Oh yeah, no. Although it's interesting, I use my smartphone like an old dumb flip phone. The only thing on it that I actually use as a smartphone that I can't do with the old flip phone is talk to text. That's why I got it, basically, so I could talk to my daughter or other people and simply talk to text. And, you know, sometimes it makes pretty egregious mistakes.
My point here is that
how it works, who the hell knows? I mean, I don't know.
This is the magical thinking of our day.
Exactly.
Is it not?
Exactly.
And calling that out for what it is.
Right, exactly.
I mean, with science, C.S. Lewis made this very clear. There's a great book, a collection of essays by Last name of the author is Gray, and the title of the book is The Magician's Twin.
Okay.
And C.S. Lewis is who it's about. And he, much, if not all of his writing, his fiction metaphorically and his nonfiction explicitly, is about what he called technocracy and the delusion of scientism.
Right.
Okay. And when you add, and this is a horrible combination of words, but it does nail the truth of the magical thinking we're living in. It's scientistic. It's defined by scientists. And that view they define is scientism. There is no higher knowledge than empirical, value-free science, indentured to capitalism. But all of that to say, this is the magical thinking. Science is a quasi-religion.
No, exactly.
I mean, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, they're a high priest
No,
of
exactly.
scientism religion.
Yeah, no, I love Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan and others before them. But yes, again, it comes back to Ian McGilchrist and the domination of the rational over the relational. And it doesn't matter how awesome your technological, rational understanding, manipulation of matter is, if it doesn't attend to right relationship to the air, water, soil, forest, life, and climate upon which you depend, it's ecocidal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where we are. And point being, we can think magically about it all we like, but there is no savior coming in a robotic suit.
No, science and technology, well, or technology and the market and human ingenuity can't solve what technology and the market and human ingenuity caused in the first place.
Exactly. It is a vicious circle. It is a vicious circle. Wow, man, what an hour and a half.
Truly.
I mean, I feel like my 10-year-old. I feel I'm just elated and excited by this conversation. But I think I'm kind of running out of steam myself. It's getting
I've got to walk to the post office with my wife.
Okay. All right, so let's call it a day at this point.
Okay.
But I'm all for the invitation you extended to join you in this thinking exercise.
Right. Great. I'm glad to hear it, Terry.
Keep me in the loop and keep me posted, and I'll show up.
Fabulous. Will do. I promise.
Thank you, Michael. Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll talk again soon, Michael. Thank you.
I look forward to it.